Wow. And now for something completely different, John Milton, of all people, turn to number 671, and we will read responsively. Freedom. Our faith and knowledge thrive by exercise as well as our limbs and complexion. If the waters of truth flow not in a perpetual progression, they sicken into a muddy pool of conformity and tradition. The light which we have gained was given us not to be ever staring on, but by it to discover onward things more remote from our knowledge. Where there is much desire to learn, there of necessity will be much arguing, much writing, many opinions. Give me liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience above all liberties. All the winds of doctrine were let loose to play upon the earth. So truth be in the field, we do injuriously to misdoubt her strength. For who knows not that truth is strong next to the Almighty? She needs no policies, no stratagems to make her victorious. Let her and falsehood grapple. Whoever knew truth put to the worse in a free and open encounter. And our first hymn is Church of the Free Spirit, and though this hymn also is in our hymnal, the cowards that assembled our hymnal omitted some of the best lines. Bivouac of comrades sworn to keep our spirits free. They thought that was a little too pinko, I think. And so we will sing Church of the Free Spirit, the words inserted.
Sheaves
join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
Good morning. Welcome to the First Parish in Bedford, where we gather in the spirit of love and service to bring a more peaceful and just world. Welcome to new visitors, old friends. We come together this morning to share in the spirit of community, to promote lives of joy and meaning, to think about and love deeply this world we call home. We welcome you here just as you are, in celebration of all of our glorious human diversity, varying abilities, age, race, economic status, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious and political beliefs. We are a Unitarian Universalist congregation, living out our faith, united by shared values of respect for all life, compassion, justice, and peace. My name is Lisa Perrywood. I'm the acting parish minister here, alongside Senior Minister John Gibbons. And today we welcome Chip Berlet as our guest speaker. He's a prominent investigative journalist, research analyst, photojournalist, scholar, and activist, specializing in the study of extreme right-wing movements in the US. He also studies the spread of conspiracy theories, so just a little bit timely right now. The title of today's talk is Trumping Democracy, White Supremacy, Xenophobia, and Fascism. Following the service, please join us for fellowship and coffee in the common room right behind here. Stop by the welcome table on your way if you'd like to find out more about us or tell us more about you. You can also fill out a blue connection card during the service in the pew there if you'd like to stay in touch with what goes on here. After the service at 11:30, you can meet others right upstairs in the Bacon Room for a discussion related to today's service. And also at noon, there will be an informal session of You and You with John Gibbons for anyone who wants to know more about Unitarian Universalism and First Parish, and that will be in Reverend John's office, which is down the hall here. Next Sunday, March 11th, from 4 to 6 p.m., the Religious Education Committee will be doing a World Cafe style with refreshments, visioning of religious education for the children and youth of First Parish Bedford. If you've never experienced the World Cafe style forum, it's a lot of fun. It moves very quickly. It's brainstorming and using your imagination and your creativity. So if you have not signed up yet, there's probably just a very small handful of you who have not. Please speak to Lisa Rubin, and she'll be happy to make sure you're RSVP'd for that. And finally, in the back of your order of service, there are other announcements. I call your attention to those. And welcome, one and all.
Before our kids' choirs come back again, I want to have a chance to introduce Chip Berlet. Chip, come stand up with me here for a second. Yeah, right. Can I have a volunteer? Chip, thank you. This is Chip Berlet, and he is one of the great students of democracy and threats to democracy, and I just wanted you to have a chance to be introduced to him before you go off to your classes. You got a few things to say, right, Chip?
I do. And I think if I talk louder, magically the sound goes up. So, democracy. So, to understand democracy, you need to understand Plato. So I brought Plato. This is Plato. Okay, Plato's a finger puppet. He's not here. But one of the most important things to know is that the idea of democracy goes way back. It goes to people in China, even before Plato was chewing his, stuff. They were talking about how to build a society that had some idea of democracy, not as extensive as Plato talked about it. And different people that have written on democracy, much smarter than I have. One of my friends was Professor Herman Seneko, who is the world's leading authority on Plato. We also went fishing together, and our kids went fishing together, so he was a nice guy. And so he invited me to lecture with him at the University of Chicago one day. And basically, we had, it was one of these, this many students in an introductory class on philosophy. And we began talking about democracy. And the subject of, wait for it, the movie Lifeboat came up. How many people have seen the movie Lifeboat? There's a few hands going up. Okay, so this is a spoiler alert, but I'm not going to give too much away. These people are in a lifeboat because a fascist submarine has sunk their boat. And they're in the lifeboat. And it's a problem because there's not a lot of food and water, and one of the people on the lifeboat is really injured, and there's a nurse on the lifeboat, and she says, he's probably going to die, and everyone goes, oh, that's sad. But then they start talking, well, maybe, he's drinking water, and he's eating food, and he's going to die anyway. Why don't we throw him overboard? And there's this discussion, and I won't tell you what happens, but my trick to my friend, Herman, was to say, Herman, in this discussion, all these people had different reasons why you don't throw the person overboard, or most of them do. Who was morally superior? And he thought about it for about a quarter of a second. He goes, oh, Chip, it's a trick question. I go, okay, so he caught it. What's the trick question? And he said, because it doesn't matter how you know you don't throw a person out of the lifeboat overboard. What matters is that you know you don't throw the person who's injured in the lifeboat overboard. And that's the most marvelous thing about living in a democracy. In a real democracy, we don't throw anybody overboard. We don't throw them under the bus. We don't throw them out of our country based on ridiculous arguments of who they are, what they look like, who they love, where they come from, and whether or not they vote Republican or Democrat. The essence of democracy is learning how to have those debates that can be a little fractious that we talked about earlier in a way that allows a resolution and for us to continue on. We are in this wonderful edifice. On this site, the first town meeting in Bedford was held. On this site, democracy was first built in Bedford as a town. This is an important place, and you can feel the spirit in it still. So I want to implore you to think about what it means to be in favor of democracy, and to understand that we are being challenged now to defend democracy. And defending democracy is vital. Now, of course, also in 1805, this church sort of helped steal Harvard from the Calvinists. How many people know that? Yeah, see, she raised her hand. He knows. So, okay, so what's that about? Well, we're talking about the earliest kind of super doctrinaire Calvinists who thought everyone is born bad and only a handful of special people get to go to heaven, right? And that seemed like a really bad idea to the people who founded this church. And they said, well, that's ridiculous. We know better. We've read the Bible. It's not what it says there, at least not in the New Testament. So what happens is that these people go to Harvard and they hold an election for who's going to preach from the pulpit in Harvard, and they elect a proto-Unitarian Universalist. And then from then on, people going to Harvard are taught that people are basically good. And one of the goals of a democracy is to work with people to together build the democracy. And that's the message I want to leave the young people with today. It's worth defending democracy, and resistance is not futile. Thank you.
Resistance is not futile. Janet, back at you. Chip, you better be good. Kids and teachers are now going to... Oh! I'll sit down now.
John, this is my show today.
As I was saying, now is a good time for kids and teachers to go off to their classes and in-gathering, and we will sing Spirit of Life.
Good morning. I'm Randy Courier, a member of the lay pastoral team. And at this time, you're invited to come up and light a candle and share any joys or concerns. And I'll also be here after the service if you'd like to light a candle more privately. And I'll light one final candle for all we hold in our hearts in silence.
William Ellery Channing wrote some really good things, which you can find at number 593 in the reading The Free Mind, but I'm going to let you read those on your own time. And we're going to move on directly to Ron Cordes, who will introduce our offering.
Good morning. My name is Ron Cordes, and this is the first Sunday in March. For the past 5 years, First Parish has split its first Sunday offering with organizations whose mission and whose values we support. Once again this year, our first Sunday offering is being shared with the Margaret Barr School in Shillong, India. Margaret Barr, for those of you who don't know her, was a British Unitarian woman who went to the Northeast India as a Unitarian missionary. Now there's an oxymoron for you. She was appalled, as I think we all would be, by the lack of quality education, or even education period, in the area, and devoted the rest of her life to working with the Unitarian Union of Northeast India to set up schools there to teach children who otherwise had absolutely no access to education. This school, the school that we are helping, is run by the Unitarian Union of Northeast India, and it accepts students of all faiths or no faith at all. The Indian government only pays this school enough to pay for the physical expenses of the school and the salary of the headmaster. The teachers receive absolutely no compensation. For the past 4 years, First Parish has pledged $2,500 a year to pay for the salary, if you can call it that, of the other 5 teachers. That's $500 a year, and that is the only compensation that these 5 women receive for what they do. So please, I implore you, look deep in your hearts, reach deep in your wallets, and help us support these teachers with even this small amount of money. I thank you, and the children of Shillong thank you. Our offering will now be most gratefully received.
I chose readings for this service from our hymnal. Frederick Douglass, John Milton, William Ellery Channing. Yes, I should have chosen some women too, but I chose these because they are partially representative of our faith commitment to freedom and reason and democracy and the necessary clash of ideas. One of the things that is unique about our religious tradition is that we believe in democracy. Not that we think democracy is a good idea or merely opine that compared to others it is a good system of governance. Actually, we know that democracy has been known to produce some decidedly bad outcomes. Don't we? Demonstrably bad, definitely bad, really, really bad. Amen? Amen. Do you know the story of the day that someone brought a duck to school and the kids got to wondering, is this a girl duck or is this a boy duck? And nobody seemed to know how to sex a duck. That is until a UU kid raised her hand and said, I know how we'll tell. We'll vote on it. Voting is not infallible, we know, yet we have faith in democracy as the best means of honoring the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. There's more. For us, democracy is not just a religious belief, but it is a religious practice. And like every practice, it needs to be exercised. And to be effective citizens, we must be literate and skillful in the practice of democracy. That is why next month we will have not one but two Spirit of Democracy Sundays. Reverend Billy and the Stop Shopping Choir from New York City will be here on April 22nd, Earth Day, Earth-alleluia. And the following Sunday, April 29th, we'll welcome our own Neera Tanden from Washington, D.C. She is the president of the Center for American Progress. Not only must we be literate and skillful in the practice of democracy, we must also know and be vigilant to that which corrupts, abuses, poisons, and threatens our democracy. The gospel says we must be as gentle as doves and as wise as serpents. And this is where Chip Berlet comes in. Chip is a wise serpent. Anybody ever introduce you that way, Chip? An investigative reporter, an independent scholar, photographer, videographer, and human rights activist. He has spent over 40 years studying prejudice, demonization, scapegoating, demagoguery, conspiracism, and authoritarianism. He has investigated far-right hate groups, reactionary backlash movements, theocratic fundamentalism, civil liberties violations, police misconduct, government and private surveillance abuse, and other anti-democratic phenomena. He says he used to be a print journalist, but now he is a content provider. Do kids say, when I grow up, I want to be a content provider? Chip is often in the New York Times and a whole lot of other publications. He's frequently on radio and TV, from Nightline to Democracy Now! Our own Mary Kasoy encouraged me to invite Chip, and he lives right in our backyard, and he's kind to join us today. I told him that if he goes way over time, absolutely nobody will object because we're not going to vote on it. Please welcome our tutor in democratic literacy and practice, Chip Berlet.
So I'm thinking of citing some women that you might look at their writings. Harriet Tubman, who we just heard was here, upstairs at the colloquium up there. Sojourner Truth, our son, who's all grown up now and is always embarrassed when I say this, went to the Sojourner Truth Daycare Center in Chicago. Ruby Sales. If you haven't heard of Ruby Sales, she's a dear friend. I work with her. I have worked under her direction, and you must know about her work in the civil rights movement. And for 30 years, I worked for Dr. Jean Hardesty. She was a lesbian feminist scholar who in the late 1970s began to be very afraid that something was building in the heartland where we were at the time in Chicago, and that it was not just sexist and racist and homophobic, but it was anti-democratic. And she took all of the money she had and raised money from all of her friends and set up a think tank to study the rise of the right. Now, this was in the late 70s. We opened our doors in Chicago in '81. And since then, not just our think tank, which still exists as Political Research Associates in Cambridge, world's largest library of hate literature. Yes, you know, you gotta read this stuff. And I think it's really important to understand that this isn't just an analysis that comes from a handful of people, and it's not a new analysis. And when people say they never could have expected Trump, they are fools. The other thing for Jean Hardesty was that she told me when she hired me is if I ever talked over my limit as another loud white male, I'd be in trouble. And she gave me a stopwatch. Haiku for democracy. With democracy paddling upstream then stopping, we are pushed backwards. So in 1805, you folks stole Harvard from the Calvinists. Okay, so we know about that problem. We've talked about it with the kids here and the children here and the young adults here. But it's important to understand the framework of the early Calvinists bringing the settlers to America. And the theory of this very vitriolic and nasty form of Calvinism, which obviously I'm not a Calvinist, is that God speaks to men only. Men instruct their helpmates, the women who are wise and are the property of husbands. Together, husbands and wives own and discipline their children to resist evil, which is already in them, and that mankind that exploit the earth in any way they see fit. I remember that when Trump was elected. And I'll stay away from that to avoid controversy, but I'm going to talk about some of the issues that come to mind when I'm looking at what we're facing today. First, the issue of structural racism. Racism, white nationalism, white supremacy, saturates our lives in the United States, from our major political parties to the patriot movement to just all sorts of violent insurgents and actual neo-fascists and neo-Nazis who actually wear swastikas and quote fascists, who run around the country intimidating people who are working for human rights. We need to confront the color line that bestows on those of us who are white people unfair advantages, and we need to revoke that grant of privilege. Because as Martin Luther King warned us, either we build community or we face chaos. So what are the ingredients that we need to understand when we're looking at this? Pre-existing prejudice or tensions in the society that can be tapped into. If there are already prejudice and tensions in the society, then people who want to build a backlash against democracy exploit that. The intensity of the vilifying language, you need to understand the word vilify. It really means talking about people in a way that not only disses them, but dehumanizes them. Intensity of the vilifying language and its distribution to a wide audience and repetition of a message. Dualistic division. The world is divided into a good us and a bad them. Demagoguery, hard to say, good to remember. The respected status of a speaker or writer at a target audience. A constituency is molded through this process. So demagoguery is when someone uses their platform to spread a message of division. Vilification and demonization. Our opponents are dangerous, subversive, probably evil, and maybe subhuman. They're not like us. And the scapegoating. Scapegoating is they. Don't you always love the they? They are causing all of our troubles. We are blameless. So all of this works to, and there's actually a great term I discovered in doing research on this, constitutive rhetoric, and it comes out of media studies. And it is the idea that certain kinds of rhetoric can call into being, or interpolate, as they say in sociology, that call into being a mass constituency. And that this vilification and demonization and scapegoat and incitement and conspiracism and apocalyptic aggression work to constitute a force that will be mobilized and perhaps move to violence against the other. So that's great. It's always the outsiders, it's in us, and the outsiders are conspiring to harm the real deserving people, the real people of the community or nation. And the named others are scapegoated then, and we are all told as the real people, who are apparently, all straight white Christian men and straight white Christian women, that these others are out to get us, and we have to mobilize against this threat to us. So that's the us-them dynamic that we talk about. And so that is, in fact, the dynamics behind every genocide in history, just so you know where this ends. When this process is unleashed, it can end not just in assault, not just in murder, not just in mass violence, but genocide. Okay, so that's how scary it gets when you start researching these processes. And this set of dynamics extends across political and religious spectrums, and sometimes involve both. Now, of course, we know about them. They always lie to us. They don't love their children like we do. They can't be trusted. They're probably plotting against us right now. And we must act now before it's too late. And that's the trick about this form of rhetoric. It implies, in fact, it instructs, that unless we act against them first, they will get us. And so the outcome then is obvious. If they're going to come after us, we should get them before they get us, right? It's perfectly logical. And so it gives justification to ostracizing, harming, assaulting, killing, and exterminating people. Because we had no choice. We had to defend the nation. In their study of how media manipulation for political ends can help incite genocide, Frohart and Temin looked at the media content of the Rwandan genocide, and they discovered that the media content helped shape the individual's view among the people who committed the genocide, and that fear and content creating a sense of inevitability and resignation that violence was about to occur. Now, there was actually a radio station that spread this across the nation, and we know the result was a genocide, and this set of scholars and several others have studied how rhetoric played a role in mobilizing a mass base for fascism. Now, some of you go, oh dear, mass base for fascism, I've heard that before, haven't I? So a mass base for fascism is what brought Hitler to power. It's what brought Mussolini to power. And the fear is that when you have a mass base for fascism, it can get out of hand. And people tend to forget that Hitler was given, essentially, the leadership of the country because there was a fear that troublemakers, the socialists, the communists, the labor union leaders were out to destroy the country, the nation, and that Hitler was going to set things right and stop that from happening. We all know how that ended. It did not end well. Apocalyptic aggression. Apocalypse, I've learned how to say apocalyptic millenarianism and apocalypticism and millenarianism. Anyway, millennialism, it all comes from the same three words in three different languages. Prophecy, revelation, and I'm going to forget the third word, prophecy, revelation, and apocalypse, all have the same meaning. Now, it's a complex word in all three languages back in the old days. It means there is, and this is complicated because it's about the unveiling of truth. That's what the word means, the unveiling of hidden truths. The apocalypse reveals the hidden truths, okay? So that, what are the hidden truths then? Well, people then try and figure out what the hidden truths are. So apocalypticism then is the idea that there's an approaching confrontation. It will be between good and evil. The outcome is uncertain. The struggle could be, intense. And at the end of the struggle, the world will be changed in a significant way. But remember, the outcome is uncertain. So apocalyptic aggression is when you think there are people out to get you, and you think it is your duty to God and country to stop them before they get you. To stop the not real people, the people who don't really belong here because they have the wrong skin color, the wrong, immigration status, the wrong sexual identity, whatever is wrong in your tablet, I have to hate gay people today. Basically, whatever is wrong, they deserve what they're about to get. And that's the apocalypse of aggression. Aggressive apocalypticism. Apocalypse doesn't have to be bad, it can be good. There are hundreds of scholars who study apocalypticism. They look at good and bad outcomes. They talk about how it can lead to, the anti-slavery movement was an apocalyptic movement. That Civil War was an apocalyptic war. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. You think that was just a turn of phrase? So that part of our history is the idea that there will be struggles that are apocalyptic, and they can be good or bad, and if we're good, we will get on the good side of that struggle. And we have to recognize there will be people who use apocalyptic aggression to smash democracy and target the others. Now, just checking, Gene. This brings me to a conversation I had, and I work with a lot of people who study this stuff, and we sometimes get together, and a bunch of us would get together at something called the Z magazine, which was definitely run by comrades. And basically, among the people, like Barbara and Aaron Reich would come and speak, and Noam Chomsky and all these other people. I once drove Bill Hooks and Barbara Ehrenreich and Holly Sklar in a small car to this meeting, and I almost drove off the road because they did nonstop jokes the whole time. What can I say? Anyway, so I got to meet Noam Chomsky, and we had lunch down with some of the folks a few years ago, a while ago, and he had used the word the Weimar Republic, Weimar. He talked about the Weimar Republic. It's spelled with a W because, that's how they spell it. So the Weimar Republic was the republic, the democratic republic before Hitler took power. Okay, and so it's a code word for people who study fascism, and some of us, we used to get together, and we'd flip a coin and we'd say, heads or tail, is it Weimar time? Because you sort of have to do sick humor when you're studying fascism and Nazism. So the deal is this: what's Weimar time? It's not like Miller time, drink of beer. Weimar time is that point in a democracy when it is so fragile it can collapse into authoritarian or totalitarianism. Okay? That's Weimar time. That's what happened in Weimar. And there is, in our very own area, a professor bookbinder at UMass Boston, who is the world's leading authority on the Weimar Republic. And he has presented and built at Facing History in Ourselves, which is an anti-genocide curriculum, something called The Fragility of Democracy, in where he lays out the moments during the Weimar Republic period when people could have stood up and stopped Hitler. And other people who study these moments say there are many times when societies move towards this kind of apocalyptic aggression and people pull it back. But there are also times when a nation is moving towards this form of apocalyptic aggression and it cascades into authoritarian or totalitarian rule. So people always want to know, basically we flip the coin, is it fascism yet? And of course the answer is, if you can flip the coin and ask the question, it isn't. But the point is that it can be. It is always possible. So if you say now we're living under fascism now, I want to tell you that if we were living under fascism, many of you folks would be dead, several would be in jail, and the rest of you would be scattered away from this building. Let's be clear what fascism is. It ain't opposition to a particular person in a political party. And the whole point of what I'm talking about democracy is that we have to find ways to reach across existing boundaries to talk to people about what's going on in the country without calling them stupid or crazy, or you open the direct mails of the Democratic Party and they call them all these names, all these people we don't agree with, they call them names that demonize and then ask you to write a check. That will not stop what's happening in this country, nor will the rhetoric that is used by the Democratic Party. And I'm going to hit on the Democratic Party because I think folks need to put pressure on the Democratic Party to stop scapegoating white working people as all racist idiots. Because I work with people in those communities, mostly through labor unions, who are white working people trying to find language to reach some of their own members and people in their community to stop what's happening. And the more money that's raised by certain people to fight these stupid, ignorant folks, the more likely it is we will fail. So just keep that in mind the next time you get an envelope saying we have to stop the crazy bigots out in Oklahoma. Because I have friends in Oklahoma who are organizing against racism, sexism, homophobia, and anti-democratic movements. So the message I'm bringing to you is that we are in the Weimar moment. We don't know which way it's going to go. But I like reading this book every couple of years. Eichmann in Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt. It's a little book. It's been dissed lately, but I don't think the criticism has much validity for what I get out of the book. And what Arendt was trying to explain was that evil is banal. It's commonplace. We see it all the time, and we just often don't take it seriously enough. And the banality of evil is talking about understanding that we at first will not recognize what's happening. It is banal, it's commonplace, it's just business as usual. As if, building walls and deporting people is business as usual. All right, I won't go there. But let's face it, something's wrong. But what is her point in writing this book? And it's not a discussion of what Eichmann did per se, it is a discussion of what is a society's moral obligation in a situation faced by Eichmann? And Eichmann rationalized what he was doing by saying, whatever the state tells me to do, I must fulfill that because the state is always right. And she said, no, the state is not always right. If someone asks you to do something that you know is immoral, don't do it. And we know that people did that and paid the price. The White Rose Society threw leaflets off of a balcony, much like this, not a very big place, threw leaflets that landed telling people to resist what was happening to the Jews. And they paid a price. Most of them were wounded up and executed. But the symbol of the White Rose became the symbol of the anti-fascist resistance in Europe. And so when you see at the Holocaust museums the discussion of the White Rose, remember that they paid a price, but they became the symbol of resistance. And there are still groups in the world today who still use the white rose as a symbol of resistance against fascism. So what is Arendt's base thesis? That we have an obligation to say no. It's that simple. We have an obligation to say no and then take risks to say no. And that's the universal truth. Moral people have a moral obligation to not look away from individual or institutional acts of cruelty or oppression or repression. That's the whole point of her philosophy. She's an underrated philosopher because people peg her, but this is really a powerful moral instruction. Professor Fritsche went to Germany did a computer analysis of the voting in Germany. And up until the time he did this, the idea was that it was the working class that brought Hitler into power, and the soldiers and the working class. And that was the theory in political science and social science for many, many decades. Well, it turns out computers are very unforgiving, and he discovered that, in fact, it was not the working class, it was not the working class soldiers, it was the middle class that brought Hitler to power. And how does he know this? Germans are very good record keepers. They kept records of who voted where, and they knew how much people made in those areas, and he did what was the equivalent of a zip code study, and he discovered that the people who voted Hitler into power were largely the middle class. And it's not that they had yet fallen down into the chaos of the lower class, it's that they feared they would be next. And that's what's happening in this country. It is the middle class people who feel cut off from their social and economic status, and they have what Barbara Ehrenreich calls a fear of falling. That fear of falling mobilized them to vote in what they perceive to be their self-interest, to protect themselves from falling any further. And that's important to recognize. According to Fritsche, the Nazis expressed the populist yearnings of middle-class constituents and advocated a strong and resolutely, essentially anti-left mobilization. Oh, yeah, really? Sounds familiar? Also, they basically promised the resolution of these resentments in a and this is Fritsche's words, forward-looking, technologically capable, Volkish utopia. Great. Umberto Eco writes about this, about fake populist rhetoric of fascism in a marvelous essay that's online. Fritsche observed that German fascism would have been inconceivable without the profound transformation of mainstream electoral politics in the 1920s, in which we see the dissolution of traditional party allegiances. Sorry, great. You gotta laugh, otherwise it's really much too grim. I mean, I don't like leaving people, leaving a speech I give going, oh God, woe is us, there's no hope, because there is hope, but you gotta know what you're up against, right? So, fascism in the last 20 years or so has been described by a friend of mine who I worked with, very lucky to, Professor Griffin, Roger Griffin in England, as a populist form of organizing. He has a long, very detailed definition. An hour ago on Wikipedia, it was still right, you never know. But there's a thing called definitions of fascism. Check the latest edit, but it's usually very good, and there's a lot of really good definitions of fascism from a lot of different people that are excellent. And I recommend Griffin, and there's a whole bunch of others that Paxton, Eat Well, they're all there. So if we understand that that's a dynamic of populism, how many people were taught that populism, the first populist movement in the United States was the People's Party? Come on, you remember your populism. Yeah, some hands are going up. Okay, so for years, decades, we were taught that the first populist movement in the United States was the People's Party. It was a progressive political movement in the late 1800s, and it did a lot of good things. It ended up kind of falling apart, but, worth looking at the People's Party and the populists of the left. Unfortunately, sociologists have gone back and said, well, except there was the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan, a white terrorist organization of vigilantes, was the first populist movement in the US, if by definition you mean the use of populist rhetoric and extending across a number of states. That was in the 1800s. In the 1920s, as many as 5 million Americans were in the Ku Klux Klan. They marched 1,000 strong through the streets of Washington. There's some great photos of them. In some states, like Ohio, if you joined the Rotary Club, you also joined the Klan, so you could get elected to public office. One of the largest clans and most active clans was in Oregon, not surprisingly, because that state banned people of color from even entering the state for many decades. These are just little things we tend to shove under the carpet, don't we? So there have been other growth periods of the Klan, certainly during the Civil Rights Movement. During the Civil Rights Movement, the FBI was well aware that there were going to be attacks on freedom riders at Anniston and Birmingham, Alabama, and they chose to do nothing and let them all get beat up and their bus burned. Why? Well, because they wanted to see what would happen and maybe find the leaders, which they never really found until years later. So there's a whole tendency in police agencies to allow right-wing movements to engage in violence. And in New York, there's going to be an international seminar on this next week where I'm speaking on the US, and there's a woman who's an attorney speaking about how in Germany, the police and the government allowed actual neo-Nazis to kill Muslims. That's the state. Sometimes it's not our friend. Sometimes it is. It all depends on how the state is being monitored by the people through democracy. So this is tough stuff to hear, and I understand that. I have to fact check all this because I'm a journalist by trade, but I was kidnapped and made to write scholarly peer review articles now. So I have to footnote everything, which is, for someone who actually never graduated from college, I dropped out to be in the anti-war movement. I cannot tell you what peer review is like. It's like being boiled alive in oil. And people send things like, author has no concept of authoritarianism. Oh, thanks. Perhaps author could cite, well, and you know, if you don't cite, it'll come back again. So that's what I'm doing now with some of the articles I'm writing about this. But there's the good news. There are hundreds of other scholars who have written about this. They are writing about this. They are finding new stuff every day. And I'm telling you, we have information we can use to resist. So right-wing populism is the narrative form of fascism, okay? So let's be clear that right-wing populism talks about the good us and the bad them and who are the real people and blah, 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 blah. I co-wrote a book called Right-Wing Populism in America with a friend of mine. It was published in 2000. It warned that right-wing populism was going to take over the country if we didn't worry. So, you know, we're a little pissy about that because we wrote about it in 2000, but now people write articles like in magazines saying, we've just discovered there's a right wing in America. Anyway, head slap, right? Yeah, thanks. Remember the Klan? Never mind. So, here's a problem for all of us white folks. We're running out of white folks. No, I'm a white folk. Okay, I'm very comfortable with who I am, but you know, as white folks, as a group, we're running out of white folks. Now, what has happened in the past when we ran out of white folks? Well, how many people here come from a background that is Irish? Oh yeah, Italian. Yeah, okay, Polish? Anybody? Oh, it's in Chicago, you know. I lived in Chicago for 10 years. We were doing anti-racist organizing in a Polish neighborhood. We had allies, but let me tell you, if I asked an audience in my neighborhood how many people are from Poland, 3/4 of the people would have stood up. And then they'd recommend a beer, and a bakery, and a meat, never mind. It was a great place to live for ethnic food and ethnic ideas and ethnic reality. So we're running out of white folks. So we, in the past, have made the Irish white. They weren't white. Suddenly they became white. Who knows the derivation of the word paddy wagon? It's where you throw paddy, the Irish junk. The police, who were not Irish, that's where you would arrest the Irish junks and throw them in the paddy wagon. Paddy O'Rourke, you know? We have such a great history, don't we? So then we made all sorts of other people. There's a great book called How the Irish Became White. There are other books about how the white collective kept saying more people could be white. Oh, you're white now. Oh, I didn't know. Really? Let me check my watch. So we're out of white folks. And now all these people who aren't white are coming into the country. And a lot of white folks are scared. And that's the basis of Mobilizing Resentment, the book written by my mentor, Jean Hardesty. You mobilize the resentment, and then you point people towards the other. And that's what we need to understand, that process. And that's why so many people are confused about what's happening. It's not, if, excuse me, if you describe the problem as hate and extremism, I'll warn you. Sociologists are beginning to say it's not really hate, it's pride and aggression. And that's not the same as hate, because you don't hate the rat you shoot, do you? Really hate the rat? No, you just got to get rid of vermin. It's much more important to understand that what's going on in America today is an extermination campaign against vermin. If that sounds familiar, go back and look at the Stürmer in Germany in the translations of getting rid of the vermin, the Jews. The Jews were the vermin. So, we are in a vermin eradication campaign, which we have an obligation to stop. America is not a white Christian nation run by masculinist straight men. Not if we want our nation to survive. It may be that in the past, it may be that now, but it cannot survive in the future if we don't include everyone in the democracy. No one gets thrown overboard. We are in a lifeboat. No one gets thrown overboard. No exceptions. And the whole point of Hannah Arendt's writing the book Eichmann in Jerusalem is that we all share a moral obligation to do what is within our power to stop what's happening when we see it happening on any level whatsoever. I am old enough, pushing 70, to have known George Seldes the muckraker. And my wife and I and son used to go up and visit him in Heartland, Four Corners, Vermont. He was one of the world's most famous anti-fascist writers. I met him when he was 97. He lived a bunch more years. He was lucid. He drank a martini every day of his adult life, except his family, when we visited, would say, "Don't tell George we put water in his martini, but we'll give you martini." So when he died, I was invited to bring up a big vat of martinis. For the family invited me to come up, and we had a bunch of journalists do a presentation to the family in respect for his work. So George wrote many years ago, quote, "Fascism and reaction inevitably attack. They have won against disunion. They will fail if we unite. Whatever form our activism takes, we must not fall into despair and quiescence. A struggle for justice is an old and noble one. And if we think we don't have the language to talk to people who don't think like us and who we may see as on the other side, I'm going to show you the medal my father gave me when he was dying of cancer and was going to get dressed in his uniform one last time to lead the Memorial Day parade in Hillsdale, New Jersey. And in all the years, he had never talked about what he did during the war or anything about the war. And I've asked him, so why did people fight? What did they do? How did this happen? How come you all just went off to fight fascism? And he just handed me this medal. Sorry, it's hard for me to say this. This medal was given to everyone who fought fascism in World War II, and it's from the President of the United States. It says, freedom from want, freedom of speech, and religion. So it's freedom from fear and want, and freedom of speech and religion. That's worth fighting for. Don't you think? Thank you.
get coffee, and those that want to continue conversation with Chip will gather in the bacon room in a very few minutes, and meanwhile, we'll sing, lift every voice and sing. It's number 149. true to our native land. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. You are not alone. May it be so. Amen.